The fluorescent lights of Metropolitan General Hospital cast harsh shadows across the empty corridors as Grace Miller pushed her cleaning cart down the pediatric wing. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum floor, the only sound breaking the 3 a.m. silence. At 29, Grace had perfected the art of invisible efficiency, moving through the hospital like a ghost who left everything spotless in her wake. Her phone buzzed with a text from her babysitter confirming that 8-year-old Emma was fast asleep. Grace smiled, thinking of her daughter's excited chatter earlier about the upcoming school science fair. Emma wanted to build a volcano, and Grace had promised to help this weekend. Though she wasn't sure where she'd find money for supplies after paying rent and utilities, Grace's shift ended at 6 a.m., leaving her just enough time to catch the early subway home before Emma woke up for school. She gathered her supplies, signed out with security, and stepped into the crisp October morning. The city was just beginning to stir. Early commuters clutching coffee cups and construction workers heading to job sites. The subway platform was nearly empty except for a few night shift workers like herself and some early morning joggers. Grace found a seat in the middle of the car, grateful for the momentary rest. Her back ached from hours of mopping, and her hands were raw from harsh cleaning chemicals. But the steady paycheck kept a roof over Emma's head as the train pulled. Away from the station, Grace noticed a man in an expensive suit sitting across from her. He looked out of place among the tired workers and early commuters. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and his suit probably cost more than Grace made in 3 months. She wondered what brought someone like him onto the subway at this hour, instead of riding in a private car. Benjamin Hayes stared out the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of light and shadow. His phone had died hours ago during a marathon board meeting that stretched past midnight, and his driver was sick with flu. Rather than wait for another car service, he'd decided to take the subway home to his penthouse. It had been years since he'd ridden public transportation, and the experience felt oddly liberating. At 34, Benjamin controlled a tech empire worth billions. Access had come at the cost of genuine human connection. His days were filled with meetings, negotiations, and strategic decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of users worldwide. He rarely had time for simple pleasures or real conversations with people who weren't trying to sell him something or ask for favors. The train swayed gently as it picked up speed, and Benjamin noticed the woman across from him fighting to keep her eyes open. She wore scrubs under a thin jacket, and her ID badge identified her as a hospital employee. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, suggesting she'd worked through the night. Something about her quiet determination reminded him of his own mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support his education before his company took off. Grace's eyelids grew heavy as the train's rhythmic motion lulled her toward sleep. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks to save money for Emma's birthday next month. Her daughter had mentioned wanting a bicycle, and Grace was determined to make it happen, even if it meant sacrificing her own rest. She tried to focus on staying awake, but exhaustion won the battle. Her head drooped forward, then rolled to the side as sleep claimed her. In her unconscious state, she leaned against the shoulder of the stranger beside her. Benjamin felt the gentle weight against his shoulder and looked down at the sleeping woman. She appeared peaceful, despite the obvious fatigue etched in her features. He could have easily shifted away or woken her, but something held him back. There was an innocence in her trust, falling asleep next to a complete stranger. In his world of suspicious business partners and calculated relationships, such genuine vulnerability was rare. The train continued its journey through Brooklyn while Grace slept soundly against Benjamin's shoulder. He remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her much-needed rest. Through the window, he watched neighborhoods change from industrial to residential. Thinking about how different their lives must be, despite sharing this moment, Grace stirred slightly as the train slowed for her stop, but didn't wake completely. Benjamin gently touched her arm. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I think this might be your stop." Grace's eyes flew open, and she immediately pulled away, mortified to find herself leaning against a stranger. Heat flooded her cheeks as she noticed his expensive clothes and kind eyes. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, gathering her purse and jacket. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. It's perfectly fine, Benjamin assured her, with a warm smile. Looked like you needed the rest. Grace stood quickly as the doors opened, still embarrassed by the intimate moment. Thank you for not pushing me away, she said, then hurried off the train before he could respond. Benjamin watched her disappear into the crowd on the platform, struck by her genuine gratitude for such a small kindness. Most people in his circle expected grand gestures and expensive gifts. This woman had been thankful simply because he'd let her sleep peacefully for 20 minutes as his train pulled away from the station. Benjamin found himself thinking about the tired hospital worker. He wondered about her life, her struggles, and what brought such exhaustion to someone so young. The brief encounter had stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years. A reminder of the human connections he'd sacrificed in pursuit of success. Grace climbed the stairs from the subway platform, her mind still processing the encounter. The man had been incredibly patient and kind, letting her sleep without complaint. In her experience, people with money usually looked down on service workers like herself. His gentle manner had been unexpected and touching. She walked through her quiet neighborhood as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The old brownstones stood like silent sentries, their windows dark, except for the occasional early riser preparing for the day ahead. Grace loved this time of morning when the world felt peaceful and full of possibility. Her small apartment was on the second floor of a building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling and the stairs creaked, but it was home. Grace quietly unlocked the door, trying not to wake Emma or their elderly babysitter. Mrs. Chen, who often dozed in the recliner while waiting for Grace to return, Emma was still sleeping. In her small bedroom, dark hair spread across her pillow like her mother's. Grace kissed her forehead gently, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood that still clung to her daughter. This little girl was her whole world, the reason she worked so hard despite the constant exhaustion, as Grace prepared for a few hours of sleep before Emma woke up. She found herself thinking about the stranger on the train. She'd probably never see him again, but his small act of kindness had brightened an otherwise difficult day. In a city where people often ignored each other, his consideration had been a gift. Meanwhile, across the city in his luxurious penthouse, Benjamin sat by, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. He'd tried to return to his usual morning routine of checking stock prices and reading financial reports. But his thoughts kept drifting to the woman from the train. Something about their brief encounter had left him feeling more connected to humanity than he had in months. He made a mental note to increase his company's charitable donations to local hospitals, thinking of all the hardworking people like her who kept the city running while others slept. It wasn't much, but perhaps it would make a difference in lives like hers. Neither Grace nor Benjamin could have imagined that their chance meeting would be just the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. 3 weeks passed before Grace saw the mysterious stranger again. Life had settled into its familiar rhythm of work, caring for Emma and trying to stretch every dollar until payday. She'd almost forgotten about the kind man on the subway until she spotted him sitting in the hospital cafeteria during her lunch break. Grace hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to approach him. He looked different in the harsh cafeteria lighting, somehow more human despite his obviously expensive clothes. A laptop sat open before him, and he typed with focused intensity while sipping coffee from a paper cup. Benjamin had been visiting the hospital regularly since their encounter, though he couldn't quite explain why. His company had recently partnered with Metropolitan General to upgrade their computer systems, giving him a legitimate reason to be there. But truthfully, he kept hoping to run into the tired woman who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. "Excuse me," Grace said softly, approaching his table. "I don't know if you remember me, but we met on the subway a few weeks ago." Benjamin's face lit up with recognition. "Of course I remember. Please sit down." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "I was hoping I might see you again." Grace slid into the seat, suddenly self-conscious about her wrinkled scrubs and hastily pulled back hair. "I never properly thanked you for being so kind that morning. I was mortified that I fell asleep on you. It's nothing to thank me for." Benjamin replied, "You obviously needed the rest. I take it you work here?" "Night shift cleaning crew," Grace said, guessing the usual change in his expression that came when people learned about her job. But Benjamin's face remained genuinely interested. That must be demanding work. How long have you been doing it? Grace found herself relaxing as they talked. Benjamin asked about her work with real curiosity, not the polite disinterest she usually encountered. She told him about the satisfaction of helping maintain a clean environment for healing, though she didn't mention her dreams of someday working in healthcare rather than just cleaning around it. "Do you have family?" Benjamin asked gently. Grace's face brightened instantly. "Oh, I have an 8-year-old daughter, Emma. She's incredible, smart as a whip, and curious about everything. She wants to be a scientist when she grows up." Benjamin smiled at the obvious love in her voice. "She sounds wonderful. It must be challenging raising a child on your own while working nights." "It is, but she's worth every sacrifice," Grace said simply. "She's having trouble with some bullies at school lately, though. Kids can be cruel when they think your family is different." Something in Benjamin's chest tightened at the thought of this woman's child being hurt. "I'm sorry she's dealing with that. Kids shouldn't have to worry about such things." Their conversation was interrupted when Grace's pager buzzed. "I have to get back to work," she said reluctantly, standing up. "Grace," Benjamin called as she started to leave. She turned back, surprised he remembered her name from her badge. "Would you like to have coffee sometime, when you're not working?" Grace hesitated. Men like him didn't usually ask women like her for coffee. "I don't know if that's such a good idea. We're from very different worlds." "Maybe that's exactly why it would be interesting," Benjamin said softly. After Grace left, Benjamin sat staring at his laptop screen without seeing it. He'd learned her name was Grace Miller, and everything about her suggested strength wrapped in gentleness. The way she spoke about her daughter revealed a fierce, protective love that both moved and impressed him. Over the following days, Benjamin found himself thinking about Grace constantly. He'd built an empire by reading people quickly and accurately, and everything about Grace suggested authenticity in a world full of pretense. Her concerns about their different backgrounds were valid, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was exactly what had been missing from his life. Meanwhile, Grace wrestled with her own thoughts about Benjamin. She'd given him her phone number, though she wasn't sure why. Men in expensive suits didn't date hospital janitors, especially single mothers struggling to make ends meet, but there had been something in his eyes, a loneliness that matched her own despite their vastly different circumstances. When Benjamin finally called, Grace almost didn't answer, but his warm voice immediately put her at ease. "I know a quiet, little coffee shop in Brooklyn," he said. "Nothing fancy, just good coffee and conversation. Would Saturday afternoon work for you?" Grace arranged for Mrs. Chen to watch Emma and met Benjamin at the small cafe he'd suggested. He'd traded his suit for jeans and a sweater, though he still looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Grace wore her best dress, a simple blue outfit she'd bought for job interviews years ago. "You look beautiful," Benjamin said when he saw her, and Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. They talked for 3 hours that felt like 3 minutes. Benjamin asked thoughtful questions about her life, her dreams, and her relationship with Emma. Grace found herself sharing things she rarely discussed with anyone, including her hopes of eventually going back to school to become a nurse. "What's stopping you?" Benjamin asked. "Time, money, childcare," Grace listed. The usual obstacles for single parents trying to better their situations. Benjamin wanted to offer help immediately, but he sensed that Grace's pride wouldn't accept charity from someone she barely knew. Instead, he stored the information away, already formulating plans. "Tell me about Emma's science fair project," he said, remembering her mentioning it. Grace's eyes lit up as she described her daughter's volcano experiment. "She's so excited about it, but I'm worried I won't be much help. Science was never my strongest subject." "I'd be happy to help," Benjamin offered. "I have a background in engineering." Grace studied his face, seeing only genuine enthusiasm. "You don't even know us. Why would you want to spend your weekend helping with a school project?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because when I was Emma's age, my mother worked multiple jobs just like you do. I remember how proud I was when she came to my school events, even though she was exhausted. And I remember wishing someone had been there to help her carry the load." Something shifted in Grace's expression, a softening that made Benjamin's heart race. "What happened to your mother?" "She died when I was in college," Benjamin said quietly. Cancer. She never got to see the success that came later, never got to stop working so hard. Grace reached across the table and touched his hand gently. I'm sorry. She must have been an incredible woman to raise someone like you. The simple gesture of comfort meant more to Benjamin than any business deal he'd ever closed. In that moment, he realized he was falling in love with this woman who showed such natural compassion despite her own struggles. When they parted that evening, Benjamin kissed Grace's cheek softly. Thank you for today, he said. I haven't felt this happy in years. Grace walked home with a smile she couldn't suppress, though worry nagged at the edges of her joy. She was attracted to Benjamin in ways that terrified her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their different worlds would eventually pull them apart. What Grace didn't know was that Benjamin had already begun quietly investigating ways to help her without damaging her pride. Within days, he'd arranged for an anonymous scholarship fund to be established at the local nursing school. He'd also ensured that Metropolitan General would soon post several day-shift positions that perfectly matched Grace's experience and availability. Benjamin's assistant had looked puzzled when he'd requested these arrangements, but he'd simply said they were part of the company's community outreach efforts. The truth was far more personal. For the first time in his adult life, Benjamin had found someone worth fighting for, and he intended to build a foundation that would allow their love to flourish despite the obstacles ahead. Emma Miller peered through the kitchen window of their small apartment, watching for any sign of the man her mother had been secretly meeting for coffee. Grace had tried to be discreet about her growing relationship with Benjamin, but 8-year-olds were naturally observant, especially when their mothers started humming while doing dishes and checking their appearance in mirrors more frequently. Is he coming today, Mom? Emma asked as Grace nervously straightened the living room for the third time. His name is Benjamin, and yes, he'll be here soon to help with your volcano project, Grace replied, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. Remember what we talked about? He's just a friend who's good at science. Emma nodded solemnly, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. Any friend of her mother's who drove a car that looked like it belonged in a movie was worth investigating. Grace had been seeing Benjamin for 6 weeks, meeting for coffee dates and long walks through Brooklyn Bridge Park. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on genuine conversation and shared laughter rather than expensive dinners or flashy gestures. Benjamin had proven surprisingly adept at finding quiet places where they could talk without drawing attention to the obvious differences in their circumstances. Still, Grace couldn't shake her anxiety about introducing him to Emma, her daughter. Was the most important person in her world, and Grace had never brought a man around before. The few relationships she'd attempted since Emma's birth had ended when potential partners realized they'd be competing with an 8-year-old for attention. When the doorbell rang, Emma raced to answer it before Grace could stop her. Benjamin stood in the hallway holding a bag of groceries and a small wrapped present, looking nervous despite his warm smile. You must be Emma, he said, crouching down to her eye level. I've heard so many wonderful things about you. Emma studied him with the serious expression she reserved for important decisions. Mom says you know about science. You know about volcanoes? I know a little, Benjamin replied, but I bet you know more. Why don't you show me what you've learned so far? Grace watched in amazement as Benjamin spent the next hour sitting on their worn carpet, letting Emma explain her research while he listened with complete attention. I asked thoughtful questions that encouraged her daughter to think deeper about the project, never talking down to her or dismissing her ideas. The lava is really melted rock called magma when it's underground, Emma explained, proud of her new vocabulary. That's exactly right, Benjamin said. Do you know what makes it come up to the surface? As they worked together to build the paper-mâche volcano, Grace noticed how naturally Benjamin interacted with Emma. He was patient when she spilled paint on the newspaper, encouraging when she struggled with measurements, and genuinely excited about her creative ideas for decorating the mountain. Benjamin, Emma said suddenly, looking up from the red paint she was mixing. Are you rich? Grace felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Benjamin just smiled. What makes you ask that? Your car's really fancy, and your clothes look expensive. Plus, you smell good all the time. Benjamin laughed, a genuine sound that made Grace's heart flutter. I've been fortunate in business, yes, but the most important things in life can't be bought with money. Like what? Emma asked with the directness. Of childhood, Benjamin glanced at Grace, his expression soft. Like friendship, kindness, and spending time with people who make you laugh. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, clutching her completed volcano with pride, Grace and Benjamin sat on her small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine he'd brought. The city spread out below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. She's incredible, Benjamin said quietly. Smart, funny, and completely fearless. You should be proud. I am, Grace replied. She's my whole world. That's why this is so complicated. Benjamin turned to face her fully. What's complicated? Grace struggled to find the right words. This thing between us? I care about you, Benjamin, more than I should. But I have to think about Emma first. I can't let her get attached to someone who might decide that dating a single mother with a complicated life isn't worth the hassle. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was steady but emotional. Grace, I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest about why I was at the hospital that first night. Grace felt her stomach clench. What do you mean? I own Hayes Industries. We were upgrading the hospital's computer systems, and I was there for a late meeting. I didn't take the subway because my driver was sick. Took it because I wanted to remember what normal life felt like. Grace stared at him, processing the revelation. Hayes Industries was a name she recognized from news reports about successful tech companies. You're a billionaire. On paper, yes. But in every way that matters, I've been incredibly poor. No real friends. No one who cares about me for who I am rather than what I can provide. Until I met you. Grace stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the small balcony. This is exactly what I was afraid of. We're not from different worlds, Benjamin. We're from different galaxies. Benjamin rose and moved toward her carefully. Does it change how you feel about me? That's not the point, Grace said, tears threatening. Think about Emma. How do? I explained to an 8-year-old why the man she's growing fond of has more money than she can imagine while we're clipping coupons to buy groceries. How do I protect her from feeling ashamed of our life? Benjamin's heart ached at the pain in her voice. Grace, look at me, please. She turned reluctantly, and he gently took her hands. I don't want to change your life or Emma's in ways that would make you uncomfortable. I fell in love with who you are, where you are, the woman who works nights to provide for her daughter, who finds joy in small moments, who treats everyone with kindness regardless of their station in life. You're in love with me? Grace whispered. Completely, Benjamin said simply. And I think you might love me too, which is why you're so scared. Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. I am scared, terrified, because you're right. I do love you. Benjamin pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as she cried against his chest. We'll figure this out together, he murmured into her hair. I promise you, Grace. I'm not going anywhere. Over the following weeks, the relationship deepened, despite Grace's continued reservations. Benjamin was careful not to overwhelm them with his wealth, though he couldn't resist small gestures like ensuring Grace's car got mysteriously fixed when it broke down, or that Emma's school received an anonymous donation for new science equipment. The real test came when a photographer spotted them together outside Emma's school. The tabloid photo ran with the headline, Tech Billionaire's Secret Love, Single Mother from Brooklyn. Within hours, Grace's phone was ringing constantly with reporters wanting interviews. Grace stood in her kitchen, staring at the newspaper photo of herself and Benjamin walking hand in hand while Emma skipped ahead of them. They looked happy in the image, like a real family. But the article speculated about Benjamin's motivations and painted. Grace is a gold digger who'd trapped a wealthy man. Mom, why are there people with cameras outside? Emma asked, peering through the blinds Grace had drawn tight. Benjamin arrived. Within an hour, having hired security to clear the reporters from Grace's building. He found her sitting at her kitchen table, the newspaper spread before her, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this to Emma, Grace said, without looking up. She's 8 years old, Benjamin. She doesn't deserve to have strangers writing about her family or taking her picture without permission? Benjamin knelt beside her chair. This will blow over. It always does. We just need to ride it out. No, Grace said firmly, finally meeting his eyes. You need to go back to your world, and Emma and I need to stay in ours. It's better for everyone. Benjamin felt panic rise in his chest. Grace, you don't mean that. We love each other. Love you. Isn't always enough, Grace replied, her voice breaking. Sometimes protecting the people you care about means making impossible choices. Benjamin left her apartment for what Grace insisted would be the last time both of their hearts were shattered. Emma watched from her bedroom window as the kind man who'd helped with her volcano project walked away. And somehow she knew he wouldn't be coming back. But love, as Grace would soon discover, has a way of finding solutions that seem impossible. And sometimes the very obstacles that threaten to destroy it become the foundation for something stronger than either person could build alone. The story of Grace and Benjamin was far from over, though neither of them could imagine the twist of fate that would soon bring them back together, in a way that would change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others who, like them, dared to believe that love could bridge any divide.